Hi, I'm Melissa Maxx, and this is Soul to Soul Conversations, where I speak with authors and thinkers and personal development experts on becoming self empowered and taking charge of our life. And today I'm speaking with Jaime Mahler. She's the author of the book Toxic Relationship Recovery, Your Guide to Identifying Toxic Partners, Leaving Unhealthy Dynamics, and Healing Emotional Wounds. So I want to start with the basics. People come to me, they have an anxious attachment style, they have abandonment issues, they struggle as a result of childhood emotional neglect, and they often, which is so interesting, they don't know what a healthy relationship is. They don't know what are authentic, realistic expectations. They don't know about boundaries. So tell me, what is your definition of a toxic relationship?
In a simple way, it's a relationship that's not functioning in any real way. It's not really functioning. And what people go is like, what do you mean? Like, we're talking, we're going to work, we're going and buying groceries. And I'm like, right. But emotionally and psychologically, it's a non-functioning relationship. The hallmark of a toxic relationship would be that the relationship is unclarified. There's no real shared vision. It's very confusing to be in the relationship, which means you are unsure of the direction it's going. You're unsure of how to articulate your needs. You don't know how to have a healthy dialogue. The other person doesn't know how to have a healthy dialogue with you. And so it's really a relationship that lacks a lot of emotional skills. And people are like, okay, so does that mean if I don't have any emotional skills, does that automatically mean my relationship is toxic? And I would say, no, it's not an exclusive thing. Like, it's not, this is A plus B equals C, but it's definitely a factor that if there is no emotional skills, that you're going to end up with behaviors that are going to slowly evolve into more and more toxic behavior.
I think it's interesting too, and I think this is where it sort of gets confusing. There is some function of the dysfunction. So a lot of times we have people who are afraid of their emotions or they're afraid of intimacy. So we have people with an anxious attachment style coupled with people who have an avoidant attachment style. And I sort of call it like the match made in heaven / hell, because they feed each other's needs by denying each other's needs. So, you know, it's dysfunctional, but there is a sort of covert function is where we don't have to get intimate. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. And I love that you brought that up because the entire beginning of this book, I talk about normalized behaviors, right? We've normalized this vicious cycle. We've normalized the idea that my partner is allowed to call me a terrible swear word or a cuss word in a conflict, right? Like, I give that small example, but that one is a really good one because I sit there and I go, when did that become normalized, right? Did all of your past partners call you the C word when you were dialoguing? And they'd be like, no. And I go, okay, so when your partner called you the C word when you were having a conflict, what was the next thing out of your mouth? And they're like, nothing. I just was like, okay, that's messed up, right? Or this is the worst case scenario, they took their unlocking of the swearing as the permission that they can swear back. So now they've never conflicted like that before, but they just got called the C word and they're like, oh, here it comes. And it's unlocking the floodgates. And I get to go right back at you with that behavior. And I go, that is a recipe for disaster. Because when we norm traumatic or toxic behaviors in a relationship, that's exactly how there's functioning in the dysfunction.
So I think that's really important because it sort of takes two people to create this dance. You know, one person, if there's a completely, and I use the word healthy, but secure person who knows boundaries and has emotional intelligence, they will either remove themselves from the entire relationship or set some clear boundaries, as you said, to sort of stop that behavior. So that brings me to the fact that I really believe the majority of people walking around on the planet have some sort of unintentional trauma, you know, whether it's childhood emotional neglect or just their needs weren't met. So can you talk about how that skews adult relationship needs? You sort of have two unhealed children showing up. So how does that come into play?
I actually, I mean, I'm a therapist. So I tell people, I've met 70-year-olds, 70, like 70-year-olds that have the emotional intelligence or EQ of probably a 12-year-old. And I know right away when I'm dialoguing with them, I have to change the way I dialogue because I'm talking to someone that doesn't have the same level of emotional intelligence that can actually absorb what I'm saying. I'm not trying to like super stereotype or categorize them into this huge, like, box. But what I want you to hear is when you are developing emotional navigation skills, you have to understand who you're in the car with and who's navigating with you. Because if you're in the car and you're asking for your 12-year-old for directions, you think you're going to get a lot of great feet. No, you're probably going to get like whatever comes to their head. You're not going to get a lot of information from them. But when you talk to someone who knows how to navigate emotions with you, you're going to find your destination faster.
And another part of that is, I'm just going to sort of skip ahead because the book is broken up into sort of understanding the relationship and then healing yourself. But we'll go back to the relationship. But you mentioned that when we heal ourselves, our voices grow louder and stronger. And what you just said about like the teenager driving around, that's sort of what I was thinking when I talk to my clients. I talk about there's different voices in our head, and there's the higher authentic self, and then there's that wounded inner child. And that wounded inner child has been driving the bus for so long, and we've been letting it. And once we start working on soothing it and quieting it, then that voice that you speak of, that authentic voice, gets louder, and we can tap into that more. And that's the beautiful part of the healing, but you have to go through the trenches in order to get there.
For the people that are curious, the book is divided in part 1, relationship with the other person. And then the second part is healing the relationship you have with yourself, with your own voice, the way you talk to yourself, the narratives that you bring up for yourself, the voices that you say to yourself in the mirror. All of those things need to be reevaluated and reanalyzed in order to understand who are you? Who are you unpartnered? Think about that for a second. When you can challenge yourself and go, who am I unpartnered? Without partner, who am I? When you can actually start answering that question, you are on the road to recovery. And when you can reclaim yourself, you say, actually, I belong to me. Actually, my power is never given away. It's only founded deeper inside of myself. I don't want power over people. I want power over my own authority and over my own voice and over my own self. That's all I want. I don't want people to speak over me, right? So this is what we're doing when we're developing the relationship we have with ourselves. We want to ask ourselves, what is the dialogue inside of me, right? And so when you have these old narratives from toxic relationships, they get indoctrinated into your internal narrative that you were exposed to for so long that it slowly crept into your narrative. And now you woke up, now you're 30 years old, and it's par for the course. It's just something you say every single day. And that's what part 2 tackles. In part 2 of this book, it actually helps you walk through how to dialogue with yourself in a way that's not mimicking a toxic dynamic or a toxic partner.
That programming is so deep, as you said, society, a lot of people, they don't want to blame their parents. And the majority of parents are well-meaning, but they're also part of this society. They've also had their own sort of brainwashing or buying into the narrative. So there's no blame here. It's really about understanding that we sort of set the bar for how other people treat us. If we say these things to ourselves about ourselves, we're really not going to set boundaries or push other people away when they say it, because it sort of confirms our beliefs.
Exactly. If you looked at me, if me and you were besties and you were like, yeah, Jaime, you kind of do look like a cow today. I don't, why would I say, yes, I would probably be like, dude, you just said that out loud. But my brain would be like, there it is. Of course she said that, because why wouldn't she? So when someone, it's a therapist, life coach, whatever, one of your doctors sits there and goes, is that how you talk to yourself? And you're like, yeah, whatever. It's not a big deal. No, it is a big deal.
Everything.
I actually say this. I say this to my clients. I say this to anyone who will listen. I'll say, take yourself seriously. Please take yourself seriously. Take the words that come out of your mouth seriously. Take the thoughts that come into your brain seriously. So when you call yourself a fat cow, start taking that seriously. Start realizing that that's a narrative that you're going to have to untangle in order for any boundary.
And that's where mindfulness comes into practice, like being aware. We so blindly obey that voice in our head, not even realizing that it's not us. Do you have any tips on how to become aware of that inner monologue and that inner critic and that inner bully?
Well, actually, I haven't done it on this interview, but I actually practice this a lot. I do a lot of in vivo or like in action processing or modeling in my sessions. And I tell my folks, I go, listen, there are things that I say that come out of my mouth that aren't actually in alignment with me sometimes. So for example, and I did this when I was recording this audiobook. I'm not joking you. This actually happened. Real story here. In the production room, I had made a mistake or something. And as I was walking away, I was like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. And it wasn't recording. It wasn't recording, but I wish it was, because if it was recording, you would have heard me say this. I said this out loud to the production team. I said, you know what? No, I'm not actually an idiot. I just made a simple mistake and I'm actually walking back. I'm just making a mistake in this moment. That's all it is.
Oh, I love that. And that's great. And you know what? Listen, we all do it. How many times am I
Oh my God, we do.
I'm just like, oh, I'm so stupid. That was so stupid. Or, the trick really is catching yourself in exactly what you said, then reframing it. That I sort of wish you were recording that when it happened. And you said, I'm such an
I
idiot.
do. I know it was right after we stopped. I know. I was like,
Beautiful teachable moment. So when we're talking about relationships or toxic relationships, when I'm navigating with people, as we do the healing work, they're often like, do I stay in the relationship? And I say, don't focus on the relationship right now. Let's focus on you. And then once you know you, it'll become sort of organically more clear. And they say, but I love him, but I love her, but I love. So I generally say to them, well, let's explore what love means to you. And then, lo and behold, your book, I even printed it out. I love what you wrote. These are the questions you ask. Is this truly what I think love feels like? So I actually have my clients look up the definition of love, and I say, where do these two, what you're feeling and that definition, where do they overlap? Then you ask, is this relationship mimicking the relationship I had with my parents or grandparents growing up? The people who taught me how to give and receive love. And do I actually want that? We have to ask these questions. Then you ask, is this love, or is it a familiar cycle of seeking out fulfillment from someone who manipulates me? And finally, am I being shamed for wanting more? And I'm going to answer that, not only being shamed, am I shaming myself for wanting more because I don't think I deserve it? So can you talk about these things a little more?
It goes back to what we were saying in the beginning. If we've normalized that this is the best it's going to get, when we talk to, that's actually a common narrative that you hear about people who are inside of the relationship still, and they kind of know, they're getting to that state of awareness where they're like, maybe this isn't exactly what I thought it was, right? All right. Well, when you start asking those questions, what starts happening is there's this like bargaining. It's almost like part of the grieving process. And you don't even realize it's begun. You're like, why am I'm bargaining right now. Right. And you bargain with this idea of like, well, is it actually better? Are other people treating each other that much better? And that goes back to what you just read from the book, which is if your parents, or let's say even your peer group, modeled, and I talk about that in the book, the peer group modeling like very problematic behaviors, or the parents modeling very problematic relationship behaviors, what ends up happening is you never really got to see in your lived experience what it meant for a partner to respect you, or for even like a friendship to respect you. And like, look at your workplaces. Sometimes workplaces are very exploitative, and then they're also mimicking a toxic dynamic. Maybe let's start there. What have we integrated as what we're going to expect people to do to us? And then how can we reevaluate our value system around how we do want to be treated?
Okay, one final question. You talked about being honest with partners. You talk about radical self-honesty, which I love the expression, and I think really It's scary and it's painful, but this is really, really where it all starts. So talk about that definition, talk about what that is, talk about what that looks like.
What I mean by radical self-honesty is I mean, there is an inherent, please hear me on this. There is an inherent wisdom inside of you. Every single listener that's hearing this or watching this, there is an inherent wisdom inside of you. And many people have been that wisdom has been dampened or convinced inside. You've been convinced it doesn't exist. So radical self-honesty in the book is positioning you as your own authority. You have sovereignty over your voice, which means when you feel that dissonance, you take yourself seriously and you're honest about what that feeling is bringing up.
As you were just speaking, and we're just about out of time, but as you were just speaking about breaking the toxic relationship cycle, it occurred to me that first and foremost, we need to break the toxic relationship cycle with ourselves. And, you know, I always, my favorite quote, the Wizard of Oz, you've always had the power, my dear, you just had to learn it for yourself. Like, you know, that is all of it. That wisdom, that voice, that is there. It's been pushed down. It's been brainwashed out of us. We've been sort of taught that we're powerless. And all of this healing is the complete antithesis of this. So thank you so much, Jaime. This was wonderful. The book is great. I'm going to recommend it to all of the viewers, all of my clients. And this was a pleasure.